All right, how's it going? This is the last segment of the Dr. Phil show that I'm going to be talking about as far as the Ostermans are concerned. So let's go ahead and get started.
George has never been in a fist fight. He's worked in an office environment all of his adult life, and George was not a muscle-bound kind of man. Trevon was physically strong and had an athlete's physique. He could have been more physically capable than George Zimmerman.
Not true. Have you seen Trayvon?
I said,
She said that it's not true, that George clearly was a big, strong man and Trevon was a skinny boy. But anybody that's ever been in a situation where they've had to deal with a 17-year-old that appears skinny, they'll find out wiry, skinny guys are a lot stronger than they appear. And as we know, Trevon was a football player, so he certainly wasn't a weakling.
and
Trayvon was very skinny. And when I say skinny, no muscles.
So somebody who's skinny and is not fat is they either have muscles or they have fat. This is typical. People are either muscle, they have them, your body, and the way they test it is they have a little body fat index to tell you how much fat you have. And I can tell you right now, Trevon had almost no fat, and George had a huge amount of fat. Fat doesn't make you stronger. It doesn't make you more able-bodied. The muscles do. And when she says he has no muscles, she's wrong. She had no idea what kind of muscles he has. The skinny guy is more muscle than not, and it's just hard to see. That's why they call them wiry, because they appear to be thin and easily manipulated. But when you get your hands on them, you'll find out differently.
passion shows how much you loved him. My heart is breaking. Like, I don't know how to...
He killed him. He hunted him down and he killed him.
Now she's sounding like that lady in the United States Congress where she said he was hunted down like a rabid dog. So this is what she's saying. He was hunted down like George hunted him down. Well, we know better than that now. We have the facts. In fact, we are positive that Trevon doubled back looking for George, and then he attacked George, and all the evidence proves that. So getting her up here and crying and making all this emotional attitude, and I mean, if you look at her face, it's all tearless crying, and it's that kind of cries just really doesn't touch me very much. I mean, if Trevon's dad is up here and he's talking, when he talks and he's emotional, you can see it. You can see the tears rolling down his face, and it just tears me up. But this lady just looks like she's, they sent her here. She's not Trevon's mom. She has no blood connection. I know she's been around him and she obviously loved him and cared for him. But this is just, I mean, it's obvious that it's a lot of acting.
I want to hear about he was big enough to subdue him and all this and that. Zimmerman was big enough to defend himself.
She doesn't understand that when you're on your back and you've got somebody even that's skinnier than you, the weight of that person is very difficult to get off. And when that person has long arms and legs and has the ability to manipulate and move, then you can't make that argument that George could just throw him off. You just can't. I mean, you can make the argument all day long, but it's just, it's bullshit.
This is a man. We're not talking about a little boy. We're talking about Zimmerman is a man.
It's my wish that he could have.
Zimmerman could have gotten him off of.
Well, that's what she says, and, that's wonderful that she has that opinion, but I could probably put her on her back on the ground, put a 14-year-old girl on top of her, and change her attitude a little bit, A little girl, 14-year-old, on top of this woman. Come on, you should be able to get up. Let's see. Try it.
Anybody can say whatever they want to say. He didn't have to kill him. He did not have to kill him.
No, of course not. He didn't have to kill him. He didn't have to do anything. He could have just laid there and let his head get bashed into the concrete, And I am positive this lady that has not a single tear coming out of her face is just devastated by this loss, and that she thinks that Trevon's life is way more important than George's life, and that George should have just sat in his car, or if he got in the situation where he was getting beat up, he should have just let Trevon whip the hell out of him. Whether he dies or not, it doesn't make any difference, because he made the choice of getting out of his car. So it was his decision to get out of his car. So as far as she's concerned, and the other Travanites, it is absolutely, it was on him to die. He should have died. And now they want him to die, or they want him to be in prison for the rest of his life because he tried to defend himself. Of course, if the tables were reversed and they were in George's situation, that would be totally different. Believe me when I tell you, these people that make these statements, if the tables were turned, they would be absolutely saying, this isn't fair, this isn't fair. All I was doing was defending my life. But remember, and this is, I've tried to stay away from the racial issue, but all the comments seem to keep coming back to it. You have to admit that if Trevon were white, this would not be an issue. This would never have been a case. It would never have gone to the president. The president wouldn't have commented on it, and there would be no issue in the news media.
He did not have to shoot him.
All of us.
He did have to shoot him if he wanted to get free and get that guy off of him. He had no choice. Thank God he did, because if he didn't, George would probably be dead. Trevon would have fled, would have never got caught, and would have continued doing whatever it is that he was doing.
Like that.
Are feeling an emotional impact from this that will last the rest of our lives. I am so sorry that you had to go through this, and I
don't know. I don't know if I could be as compassionate as this guy is. This guy Mark. I mean, he's showing a lot of compassion for Trevon's family. He's feeling really sorry. He says, I don't, if there was anything that we could have done differently, it would have been great. But, and his argument is that George had no choice. I wouldn't be that. I wouldn't feel that way, especially if I were like George's father. And I think I fit more with that understanding. I can imagine if George was my son, or if my son was put in this position, how I would feel. And if I were on that stage right now as the father of George, or if my son were in that situation and I were talking to the mother of the child that attacked my son, I would say to her, look, I taught my son to defend himself, and your son jumped on my son and started bashing his head on the concrete. And as sad as I am that you lost your son, I am so glad that my son had the foreknowledge to carry a gun, thinking that, this neighborhood could be dangerous, that people could actually hurt you here. Thank God. Thank the good Lord, because there is no doubt about it. Trevon was the assaulter, the attacker. He was the one that was trying to hurt George. At no time is there any evidence that George ever tried to hurt Trevon. And with this dork Uncle Phil continuously saying, if he didn't get out of his car, if he didn't have a gun. Well, you keep saying that, Uncle Phil, and we'll keep saying, if you didn't have a security detail, if you didn't have security guards all around you all the time, who knows what could happen to you, or what might happen to others around you. It just bugs me to no end. Why would he keep saying, if this didn't happen, or if that didn't happen, then none of this would have happened? That's like saying, if George didn't get out of bed in that morning, then this would have not happened. If he went to the store on Saturdays instead of Sundays, this wouldn't have happened. I mean, what ignorance, what complete stupidity. And for people to sit there and applaud him on his stage, it just makes them all right there with him. In fact, I think that before they're allowed to come in, they have to sign a waiver or something stating that no matter what stupid comments he makes, they're going to applaud him and make it sound like he's the right guy. Because, I can't imagine that they could find that many stupid people in the country. I mean, you could go the whole country from one side to the other. How can you find that many people to fill up that audience and applaud him? I mean, if I were in that audience, I'd be booing him. I'd be like, boo, boo, what an idiot.
If he could have.
Trayvon was 6 foot tall, right?
Yes.
Okay, and was he a violent young man?
No, Trayvon was not violent.
You say in the tape.
Now here, she's saying that Trayvon wasn't violent, but I'm wondering, how would she know that? Did she follow him around? Did she go to school? Did she, I mean, out of all the things that he had been accused of, like there was one accusation made that he had gotten in a fight, or he punched a bus driver. So that would be a sign of violence. But let's think about it a little deeper. Are there people in this world that appear to be nonviolent and then suddenly have a burst of violence? Has it ever happened in the history of man? Or can we just assume that if somebody suddenly goes violent and does something violent, that's not them? They didn't do it. Somebody took over their body or something, right? We need to figure that out. Well, let's look at the guy that recently got shot by the cops after eating a homeless man's face off. Remember the homeless man that got his whole face ripped off and eaten off? And they said that the guy that ate his face was high on bath salts or something like that. Well, that all kind of fell apart. But here we've got a really nice guy. I mean, when you look into the history of this face eater guy, he was the nicest guy. He was, helpful to people. He was just an example to society as the kind of person you want to have around in your neighborhood. And here we have him eating somebody's face off on a road. He's sitting on the side of on the sidewalk, ripping a guy's face to shreds with his teeth. So much so that and growling, and the cops had to shoot him. So, who's to say what happened to Trayvon? Why Trayvon decided to jump this guy? What was the plan? Why was he doing this? Was he trying to rob him? Was he trying to get revenge because he felt like he had been followed and that was holding a spotlight on him, or somehow being prejudiced towards him? I know, like when I was a teenager and I would walk into a store and the people, the shop owners would say stuff, like, are you going to buy something? And they would watch me as I walked through the store, and they would look around the corner and see if I was sliding something in my pocket. And, so I know that feeling of being suspected everywhere I go. And sometimes you want to just, like you want the shop owner to think you're stealing something just to piss them off, because you're kind of irritated that they assume you're stealing something. So, I would do I'd pick something up and carry it over to another shelf and then set it down on the shelf. And then the guy'd be like, let me look in your pockets. And, I'd go, okay. And you look in my pockets, I got nothing. Where's that thing I saw you pick up? Oh, I decided not to buy it. Well, where is it? I put it down over there. So, I can feel for him. I understand how he feels that these people are monitoring his movements, and nobody likes that. But it doesn't give you the right to assault him. If I beat up the shop owner because I didn't like him questioning what was in my pockets and telling me I had to empty my pockets out, or he was going to call the cops. That's the way it was back then. That's the way it is today. Shop owners are nervous. It costs them a lot of money. They lose a lot. In the same way in this case, George had every reason to monitor him. There was a bunch of people in that neighborhood that had been, or some people that were causing a lot of problems and robberies and stuff. It was absolutely part of his job to monitor that neighborhood. And, to peek around the corner, see where Trayvon went, see if he could see him. Well, it was so dark, of course he couldn't, but anyhow, let's go.
In the tape that George wasn't very athletic, so you think he would be easy for a young athletic?
That is a possibility. That's exactly what George is thinking. And George said to us, when he struck me in the nose and broke my nose, he saw stars. He didn't know who he was. He just knew that he was bigger than him, taller than him, and he was striking him.
And that's what I want all those people that support Trayvon to put themselves in this position. I don't think they can, because once you've gone this far in supporting a criminal, and when I say Trayvon's a criminal, I say it with ease because I know he's a criminal. Anybody that would strike somebody who's doing nothing to them is a criminal. That's criminal activity. The fact that he was sneaking around the neighborhood and everything, I don't consider that criminal because we didn't have any evidence that he didn't break into anybody's house. I would say it is the appearance of criminal activity just because he's sneaking around and looking into houses and stuff like that and running off when he sees the watchman. Stuff like that would indicate possible criminality. But once he punched George in the nose, that was it. Now he's a criminal. Then when he mounted George and swung on him and kept swinging on him and refused to quit even when George is begging for help, criminal. 100% criminal. And let's be very honest about this. Had Trayvon lived and the cops had come and pulled him off of George, guess who would be in jail right now? You got it. The baby.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you believe if he hadn't had that gun and shot Trayvon, that George Zimmerman would be dead today?
I do.
Absolutely.
So you think Trayvon would have killed him?
I think so.
Absolutely.
It's
Are you
possible. I do, and I'll tell you why.
Are you
If I can have one moment. George, the injuries that he had to his head could not be sustained for any period of time without either becoming unconscious or dying. He said, I'm blacking out. I feel I'm going to die. And he told the police that. He said that in a lie detector test, all of which they have. They've connected all this together.
And that's all that is needed for him to win the stand your ground hearing. So when it goes before the judge and she makes a ruling, she will rule that George was in fear for his life. And in that ruling, that will resolve the case. He will be released, and that will be the end of it. Absolutely. If for some reason, remember we talked about this in prior videos, judges in Florida are elected. And if a judge feels that their re-election possibilities are poor if they were to judge one way or another, they will make a judgment that is against their better judgment just because they want to go along with public sentiment. So there is a slight possibility that the judge will allow the jury to see the case and hear the case rather than find it a stand your ground case, even though the judge knows that it's a stand your ground case. However, and some people don't realize this, and I'm going to try to make it quick. In Florida, we have because the legislature did not make it clear exactly how it is supposed to be determined whether a shooting was justified or not, they set it up so that a judge could make a hearing. But also, the Supreme Court ruled that, the Florida Supreme Court ruled that if the judge should rule that it is not a stand your ground case, then it will go to the jury in the same manner as it went to the judge in a stand your ground case, in a stand your ground hearing, which means the jury will act as the judge during the time that there is that hearing, and they will hear the case exactly as the judge would. And as they hear the case and then they make their decision, if they decide it's a stand your ground case, and remember they're basing that on a preponderance of the evidence, or a 50% plus a little more. So if the jury listens to all the evidence and they pile all the evidence for George on one side of the scale and all the evidence against George on the other side of the scale, if it tilts one way or the other just a little bit, then that's the way they will go. So if there's just a hair more evidence that it's a stand your ground case, then they will rule it a stand your ground case, and that'll be the end of it. If after they've looked at it they say there's just a hair more evidence towards a conviction, but it's still not enough to convict, because of course we're just doing a stand your ground hearing, it's just a preponderance of the evidence. If that fails and for some reason George does not get released based on that stand your ground hearing, the second one, because there are two. If the judge fails to pass him through, then the jury gets a chance at it. After that, and only after that, is there a trial. So if the jury says, no, this isn't a stand your ground case, then we have a jury trial. Then the jury gets to hear all the evidence, every piece of the evidence, everything that the judge allows. And all that evidence goes before them. They make a decision based on whether George was fearing for his life or not. And that's basically the case. Because we already know that George shot Trayvon. So that's not going to be a question in a trial. If it finally goes through both stand your ground hearings, judge and jury, and both cases are turned away, then the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the highest standard of evidentiary standard, means they must prove without the jury wondering if there's any other possibilities. That means they need to get a really good story together and say this is what happened, and they need to get the jury to really believe that story beyond any reasonable doubt. So what kind of story could the jury hear that would make them say that George was not fearing for his life? Because really that's the only question. There is no story. You could not put together any story that says, well, George was laying on the ground getting his head bashed, or maybe even not. Let's just say he was on the grass. He already had his nose busted and this guy's swinging on him and he's bleeding. Is he in fear for his life? Maybe. Depends on the guy. Most people would be. And based on what most people would be, then the jury's going to say, I would be in fear for my life if I was laying on the ground and this 17-year-old football player was on top of me wailing and not releasing me even though I'm begging for help. Yeah, I would be in fear for my life or for great bodily harm. Remember, he doesn't have to prove that he was in fear for his life, just that he was in fear for great bodily harm. You know, a broken arm, a broken nose is great bodily harm. He's already received great bodily harm. So these Trayvonites that insist that the damages weren't sufficient, they were the same ones that saying there were no damages originally. So of course they're going to say that. They've already smeared themselves. They've already told everybody all this false evidence, and now they're trying to cover for it.
George's perspective, he felt, I am going to die.
We are out of time. I wish we could spend more time on this. I said to you that when we came to the end of this, I was going to ask you if there was anything we haven't talked about, anything you hadn't gotten out, you wanted to say.
Here's the end, and this is the part that I was talking about on my first video, because I watched this whole video before I began recording these videos. And I found several spots where the video was clipped, where George's friend was about ready to speak, and then suddenly it was clipped out. So we don't know, as viewers of this video, how much of it the Uncle Phil cut. We just have no way of knowing. We know that he chopped it all up because I found the chops. I could tell you, look, they were talking, then suddenly click, and then it went on to something else. So we know he chopped it all up. The thing is, George's friend here doesn't know what is going to be aired. So what Uncle Phil's trying to get him to say is, hey, I told you in the beginning I was going to treat you fair, and I treated you fair, didn't I? And he's like, yeah, you did. Well, the thing is, we don't know what was said. We don't know. Maybe he gave this guy all kinds of opportunities to say all kinds of things that made George look really good. And at the end of the show, George's friend really felt good about it. He's like, yeah, you really let me say a lot of good things, and I think it's going to win the case for George. What he didn't know was the editors were in the back room chopping the hell out of this thing. Chopping it and chopping it. Believe me when I tell you, there's probably 2 hours of video on the floor in the chopping room. But Uncle Phil here wants everybody to know that he treated this guy so fairly. And we know better because we saw the parts of the clips where he was just totally obnoxious.
And tell his side of the story, and I feel like you've done that.
Correct. Terrible fury was felt for George because of the television media that wanted, it seemed like they were reality TV with sponsors. All they wanted was to make it so sensational and so outrageous To me, I understand why people have gotten so ferocious in their defense.
So you're trying to unring that bell.
Oh my gosh.
But you understand that the core of this story, this child here went to get some Skittles and got shot dead.
This is what really bugs me, and this is what bugs most of us who have been studying this trial or this story. The center of the story is nothing about Skittles or iced tea. So get that out of your head, Uncle Phil. Has nothing to do with it. You keep saying it. The child, the baby went to the store. What the hell is a kid that is suspended going to the store on his own? Look, he should have been grounded. What the hell? Who would let a grounded kid or a kid that is suspended for 2 weeks, the third time in the year, suspended, and the parents just say, oh, go ahead, walk around, do whatever you want. In the dark, it doesn't matter. We don't really care. You know why? Because good parents generally don't let their kids out in the dark anyway, much less, after they've been suspended. But here's Uncle Phil telling us the crux of the story is that a little tiny baby boy got chased down in the night by a big mean guy that was trying to play cops. I mean, really. And because of that, I believe that Uncle Phil and his show should be sued, even though they're trying to suggest that they were being fair. They were totally unfair to George. And I can't believe that they were able to actually get his friend to come on the show, because his friend should have known that this was a complete hoax, that they were planning on using him in this way.
How much you sensationalize that at the core of it, you've got some very heinous events here.
Yeah, the heinous event, the most heinous of all, is that George was beat severely, and no one would come to his aid. As much as he hollered and yelled for help, nothing. And that the most heinous is what the media has done to him, and that includes Uncle Phil here. What they've done to George, a guy that was doing nothing more than protecting his neighborhood, and then as being beat to death, trying to defend his life. And Uncle Phil wants to sit here and pontificate. I am about sick of this guy. I'm glad that this is the last of this video.
Things don't get sensationalized in the media. But I think what you're saying is an absolute insult to the American public's intelligence.
Listen, the American public's intelligence isn't insulted, but we are insulted by your statements and by your attitude. Over and over, George's friend has said clearly all he wants is the people to wait and listen to the evidence. The evidence is real clear that George was beat, that George did nothing wrong, but Uncle Phil wants to insist that the fact that he got out of his car was all it takes, and now he needs to go to prison for the rest of his life because he got out of his car, which gave this child the opportunity to beat him senseless. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Here you are, you buy into a gated community because you're looking for some security and a nice place to live. You move in, suddenly there's all these robberies, and you offer to monitor the neighborhood, to walk around the neighborhood in a dangerous place in the dark. And then you get attacked and you defend yourself. You survive because you pull out your gun and shoot the guy that's trying to kill you. And then you get people like Uncle Phil here that insist that the little child had every right to be out there beating your frickin' head in the concrete, and that it's all your fault. And if you would have just stayed in your car, Uncle Phil has his security detail. What a jerk.
To believe that they buy into the hype and don't have thoughtfulness enough to look at the core events here.
That's exactly what they do. Everybody who's depending on the TV, everybody who's depending on Dr. Phil for the information is an ignoramus, an idiot, a complete stupidity. I mean, if you absolutely have no other information than what you get from the boob tube, you're uninformed on this case. And if you depend on Dr. Phil's information and these other talking heads then unfortunately you are stupid. You're an ignorant person. And you certainly shouldn't be talking about this case or any other case. And we know, based on this whole show, there's two possibilities. Uncle Phil is either a complete stupid-ass rock, or he's playing stupid to get along because this is the boss man told him, this is the way we play. I can guarantee you there is no media, no big media that is supporting George. Even Fox News in the beginning was tearing George up because they were all going on the reports that said George chased Trayvon down and shot him in the back like a rabid dog.
Wait until some evidence is released. That's what I was hoping would happen. Analyze that, and then base your feelings on what might have happened from witness statements and from...
Oh, that's just terrible. How dare him? You know, Uncle Phil just said, you know, how you got a lot of nerve because you're making assumptions that the American people are so stupid that they would believe your story. And all he's saying is, you know, I'm not asking the American people to take my word for it or to be gullible in this way. All I ask is that they get the information first. Actually read and see and study the evidence. You know, listen to the witness statements. Something that very few, I can tell you right now, I would say there's probably, 50 people in his audience. And I would say out of all those people, not a single one has watched any of the witness statements on YouTube like the rest of us have. So, you know, when I talk about Trayvonites, there's two kinds. There's the educated type who absolutely just disagree with the reality of, you know, the law of the Second Amendment and stuff like that. But they know the evidence. They know that George was on the bottom getting his head bashed. They know that Trayvon circled back. They can tell. They know. They looked at the evidence. They can see that, you know, 4 minutes after Trayvon ran, suddenly he reappears at the same location he was when he ran away. So that's evidence. But I can tell you right now, 100% beyond any shadow of a doubt, that Uncle Phil doesn't know that. He doesn't know that Trayvon turned around and came back. He hasn't watched any of the videos that show the timeline where Trayvon turns the corner as George is getting out of his car. We can hear George's car click. We can hear him getting out of the car. We can hear him telling the dispatch which direction he's going. So we know where Trayvon is. We know where George is at that moment. 4 minutes passes by, at least 2 minutes on the video, on the actual call that passed by where George is talking quietly. He's not running. He's just talking. But unfortunately, Uncle Phil doesn't have this information. And he keeps telling us that these people are trying to pump the American public with a bunch of bullcrap, when in reality he's the pumper. And he doesn't even know it. Either he doesn't know it or he's an idiot and he's trying to sell us something that isn't real. So anyhow, I just wanted to say these things. Let me finish up this little bit and then we'll cut it out.
The lie detector tests and from the police investigation.
You think people should wait?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
agree. That's the only thing I've ever wanted.
All right. You chose to come here to speak out for the first time. Have I treated you with fairness? And
No, I don't think you were fair at all. In the little clips that I saw, I don't think it was fair at all. The reason they're going to say it was fair is because they got to say a lot of things that never got to see the day of light. The public never got to see the statements that he thought were aired. So Uncle Phil is trying to get him to say, yeah, you were fair, when in reality, this guy knows better. It would be really nice to interview him now and say, after seeing the show, what do you think? Was it fair?
here?
I agree.
Okay, I'm just asking.
I agree.
absolutely.
100%.
Okay, because I don't want to.
Well, I understand your perspective, and I understand your perspective and everybody else's more than you realize. This is so absolutely heinous and horrible.
Well, you said you wanted to tell the story and get the other side of the story out. You can't do that if I don't ask you what is in people's minds. And so I told you I was going to do that before we started, and I think I've been very true to what I said.
I can't appreciate.
No, you weren't true. You tricked him and sucked him into this thing, and you know it was going to harm George's chances for a fair trial, but you didn't really care. And this guy absolutely was trying to help George, and in some ways he did, but in some ways he didn't. And I'm sure that if George's lawyer had the opportunity to have a say in the matter, he would have said, Don't do it."
Thank you.
I appreciate it. All right, we'll be right back.
All right, so that's the end of the clip, and as you can tell, that's the end of the video. They're done here. And I am so glad this is the end of this video, because it just makes me sick every time I watch each piece of it. It's sad that a guy like Uncle Phil here could be so concerned with his income. Surely he's got enough money stacked up in his drawers that he doesn't need to make money off of George. But, that's what he did. He made 2 videos, and these obviously are totally biased. This guy was supposed to be a conservative. Come on, this isn't conservative. This isn't even common sense. I mean, he's out there in left field somewhere. He doesn't have the evidence. He doesn't have any, we didn't talk about the evidence. There was a whole hour show. No evidence was discussed. Why didn't he want to talk about the fact that George was on the bottom getting pummeled? Why didn't he talk about that? Why didn't he talk about the head getting bashed in the concrete? And why didn't he say, if it were me and I were on the bottom and getting bashed and I tried to get up and every time I tried I couldn't, that I would fight back even to the point of shooting him? Why wouldn't Uncle Phil say that? I certainly would. And I know most conservatives would. Even liberals. Even people who are anti-gun, hate guns. If they're on the ground and they're getting killed and they see a gun in reach, they're going to reach over and use it. Even if they say I would never use a gun in my whole life. Well, the truth is you will use it if you've got the opportunity and your life is about ready to be ended. Trust me on that one. Well, good talking to you guys. We'll talk to you later. Bye.